Secure transmission established. Operation Fractal update commencing. The holographic display in the briefing chamber shows dozens of faces, some in person at Texas Night Command, others patched in from across the front lines where Knights are embedded with Liberation forces. Everyone wears the same expression of professional intensity, even those whose quantum spurs still carry the dust of recent combat. I adjust my Stetson, not out of habit, but because I know it projects a certain image. Command officers around the table anticipate my report. The Texas Night High Command, including General Tact and Admiral Falconer, watch from the head of the table. In holographic windows, field operatives pause their activities to listen. Colonel Mackenzie Clarkson reporting, I begin, dropping my carefully cultivated drawl. Operation Fractal has reached Phase 4 ahead of schedule. The Sheneth Imperium is currently experiencing unprecedented internal division, with approximately 43% of its territory now under rebellion control. I gesture to the strategic map, which blossoms into a three-dimensional representation of Sheneth space. Red, blue, and yellow sectors pulse with activity markers. 3 months ago, we faced a unified empire with overwhelming numerical superiority and a near-fatical commitment to rigid military doctrine. Today, we face a splintered enemy whose own weapons, resources, and citizens now fight against it. General Tact nods with measured satisfaction. And our primary asset in this division? Former Supreme Security Director Scansellin continues to perform exactly as anticipated, I reply, bringing up footage of the Sheneth commander in his Liberation headquarters. His adoption of our tactical innovations has accelerated beyond projections. The Liberation forces have claimed 7 major Imperium strongholds in the past month alone. Casualties? Admiral Falconer asks. Human losses remain minimal. 12 Knights wounded across all fronts, none fatally. Liberation forces are suffering approximately a 1-to-1 exchange ratio against Imperium forces when accounting for battlefield salvage operations. And the resource expenditure for our continued support? Less than 15% of projected allocations, I confirm. The psychological warfare aspect has proven exceptionally cost-befitting. For every quantum spur or piece of technology we provide, we receive over 20 times the strategic value in intelligence and influence. I pause, letting this sink in. When Operation Fractal was first proposed, many in command doubted that a psychological warfare approach could work against the logical, ordered minds of the Sheneth. They'd pushed for conventional military solutions, overwhelming force, direct confrontations. But I'd seen something different during my capture at Echo 9-1. I'd seen cracks in their perfect order, doubts, questions. The beginnings of adaptation. Let's be clear about what we've accomplished, I continue. Through minimal direct intervention, we've transformed a war that would have cost billions of human lives and consumed our industrial capacity for decades into a largely internal Sheneth conflict. The threat to humanity has been reduced by 78%, with Imperium forces now primarily focused on quelling rebellion rather than advancing into human territory. And the Calaxus operation? General Tact asks. In progress as we speak. If successful, it will further accelerate the Imperium's fragmentation. I pull up the operation schematics. Scansellin has embraced our Trojan horse strategy completely, believing it was primarily his own adaptation of our suggestions. Admiral Falconer's expression remains carefully neutral. You planted the vulnerability in his thinking. I did, I acknowledge without false modesty. The Knight's visit was carefully timed to coincide with his initial planning phase. The Duncan brothers and I nudged his tactical approach in the direction we wanted, while making him believe he was simply synthesizing Sheneth precision with human unpredictability. And the quantum spur gift? I allow myself a small smile, a calculated gesture of trust and acceptance that doubled as our most sophisticated surveillance package to date. He keeps it in his private quarters, right beside his planning console. Clever, Tact admits. Now, what about the state of the rebellion itself? We're hearing reports of fractures beneath the unified front. That's where things get interesting, I reply. Stella has been monitoring internal liberation communications. I'll let her present that aspect directly. I step aside as Stella's avatar materializes in the center of the briefing room, a shifting pattern of blue light that somehow conveys both femininity and otherworldliness without attempting human mimicry. Thank you, Colonel. Stella's harmonic voice fills the chamber. My analysis of intercepted communications indicates significant underlying tensions within the liberation movement. While currently united against the Imperium, the rebel factions have fundamentally different visions for what comes after victory. Her avatar shifts, displaying a network of connections between key liberation commanders. I've identified at least 8 distinct factions forming within the liberation leadership. 3 advocate for a reformed but still centralized Shenath government. 2 push for complete dissolution into independent sectors. 1 seeks to establish closer ties with humanity, while another views us with nearly as much suspicion as they do the current Imperium. And Scancelin? Admiral Falconer asks. Where does he fall in this spectrum? That's perhaps the most interesting development, Stella replies, her avatar shifting to highlight recordings from Scancelin's private quarters. Despite his apparent embrace of human unpredictability and collaborative approaches, Scancelin's private conversations reveal more traditional ambitions. The recording plays, Scancelin speaking with his inner circle of commanders, his voice much more formal than when knights are present. The humans provide useful tactical innovations, but their chaotic approach is ultimately unsustainable for a civilization of our scale. Once the Imperium falls, we will need to establish a new order, one that incorporates adaptability within a framework of precision and control. The liberation was never meant to fracture the Shenath people permanently. It was meant to evolve us. Another recording begins, Scancelin alone in his quarters dictating to his private journal. The quantum spur they gifted me represents everything they believe I have become. A synthesis of order and chaos. They do not understand that chaos is merely a tool to be wielded in service of a greater order. The humans mistake adaptability for unpredictability. I do not seek to embrace randomness, but to harness it. When the war ends, the new Shenath civilization will maintain its fundamental nature, order, precision, hierarchy, while incorporating lessons learned from human tactics. The Knights believe they are helping birth a more chaotic society. They are merely helping us evolve into a more perfect order. Well, General Tact says as the recording ends, it seems our friend hasn't changed as much as he believes. On the contrary, I disagree. He's changed dramatically, but change doesn't mean becoming someone else entirely. It means evolving who you already are. I step forward again as Stella's avatar recedes. Scancelin was never going to become human. He was never going to abandon his core Shenath values. What matters is that he's questioning the rigidity of those values. He's creating space for adaptation within order, not replacing order with chaos. And this serves our purposes? Admiral Falconer asks. Perfectly, I confirm. We never expected or wanted the Shenath to become like us. We simply needed them divided and questioning their own assumptions. A fractured Shenath civilization, even if parts of it rebuild into new empires, will never again present the unified threat that the original Imperium did. I bring up new projections showing the likely state of Shenath space 6 months from now. A patchwork of competing territories, alliances, and independent regions. When this conflict ends, the Shenath will be too busy sorting out their internal power structures to focus on external expansion for at least a generation. Some factions will seek alliances with humanity. Others will isolate themselves. A few may remain hostile, but none will command the resources of a unified empire. And Scancelin himself, Tact asks, if he aims to establish a new empire after the liberation succeeds, let him try, I reply with confidence. First, he'll face opposition from other liberation factions with different visions. Second, his new empire, if he manages to create one, will incorporate the adaptability we've taught him. It will be more flexible, less predictable, and ultimately less dangerous than the current Imperium. I pause, considering how to frame this next part. More importantly, he'll never be able to fully purge the influence we've had on his thinking. He believes he's simply incorporating our tactics into his ordered worldview. He doesn't realize that questioning one fundamental assumption opens the door to questioning others. Admiral Falconer leans forward. You sound almost fond of him, Colonel. I maintain my professional demeanor, but there's no hiding the truth from people who've known me this long. Scancelin is an exceptional mind. In different circumstances, he might have made an excellent knight. But affection doesn't cloud my judgment. He remains a tool, a remarkably effective one, in our larger strategy. Your optimism is noted, Judas, Admiral Falconer says quietly, using the nickname I've carried for 15 years. The name only those with highest clearance know, earned through a string of psychological operations that all ended the same way, with my targets destroyed by their own people after I'd turned them. A ripple of tension passes through the room. Everyone here knows my record. 5 previous high-value enemy assets, hundreds of lower-value assets beyond that, all manipulated into becoming tools for humanity, all eventually eliminated when they were no longer useful or began to pose a threat. Not by my hand directly, that would be inefficient. By their own people, their own systems, their own fatal flaws that I had carefully nurtured and exploited. Scancelin may prove different, I say, not bothering to deny the implication. His utility continues to outweigh any potential threat. For now, Tack notes, but your track record suggests a certain finality to your operations, hence the nickname, I acknowledge with a slight nod. But each asset is evaluated on their own merits. If Scancelin can be contained rather than eliminated after his usefulness ends, that would be my recommendation. Some of the younger knights look uncomfortable. They know me as Colonel Clarkson, the drawling, bourbon-drinking operative who charms her way through impossible situations. Few outside this room know me as Judas, the handler whose assets inevitably face betrayal, often from their own side. Which brings us to the next phase, General Tack says, mercifully changing the subject. Assuming the Calaxis operation succeeds, what comes next? I pull up the timeline for Operation Fractal's final phases. We begin selectively supporting different liberation factions, ensuring no single group gains overwhelming advantage. We maintain our advisory presence but gradually reduce direct involvement. And we prepare diplomatic channels for the inevitable moment when the various Shanath factions seek alliances after their civil war ends. And if Scancelin discovers the true extent of our manipulation? Admiral Falconer asks. This is the question I've been anticipating. The one that keeps me awake some nights, though I'd never admit it to anyone but Stella. He won't, I state with more certainty than I feel. The layers of deception are too deep, the evidence too carefully managed. He believes our help comes from genuine respect for his adaptation. Even if he suspected, he could never prove it without discrediting himself in the process. I don't mention the contingency plans, the kill switches built into every piece of gifted technology, the knights embedded with other liberation commanders who have separate orders if Scancelin ever becomes a genuine threat. Some things don't need to be said aloud, even in secure briefings. One more thing, I add, bringing up footage of liberation training operations. The techniques we've taught them are deliberately incomplete. Effective enough to defeat the current Imperium, but missing crucial elements that would make them truly dangerous to humanity. They believe they've learned our secrets. They've only learned what we wanted them to know. General Tack studies the footage, then nods. Very well, Colonel. Operation Fractal continues as planned. Keep us updated on the Calaxis situation. One last question, a younger knight commander asks over the comm. Scancelin and his commanders have asked about your nickname. What will you tell them when they press the issue? The room goes quiet. Everyone with sufficient clearance knows exactly why I deflect questions about my nickname. Nothing that would compromise the operation, I reply coolly. I give them something colorful enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything significant. But never the truth, Tack adds, almost gently. No asset would cooperate if they knew they were working with Judas. I meet his gaze steadily. No asset has ever needed to know. What matters is results, not reputation. As the briefing concludes and the connections fade, only Stella's avatar remains, visible just to me through my personal quantum link. "You didn't tell them everything," she observes, her harmonic voice pitched for my ears alone. "They don't need to know everything," I reply quietly, "just enough to continue supporting the operation." "You didn't mention your growing concern that Scancelin might be more perceptive than you've given him credit for," I sigh, finally allowing myself to drop the perfect posture now that we're alone. "Because it's not relevant yet. He suspects something, yes, but suspicion isn't knowledge. And if he discovers the listening devices? If he realizes the extent to which he's been manipulated? Then I'll handle it," I reply, with the certainty that comes from years of contingency planning. "One way or another." "Like you handle the others?" Stella asks, her tone neutral but the implication clear. "Is that why you avoid telling him your nickname? Because deep down, you don't want to be Judas again?" "I avoid telling him because it would compromise the operation," I say sharply. "Nothing more. Of course." Her avatar shifts in what I've come to recognize as her equivalent of a shrug. The line between manipulation and genuine connection often blurs in long-term psychological operations. It's why most operatives are rotated out after 6 months. "You've been with Scancelin for nearly a year now." "I'm fine, Stella." "Of course you are." Her tone suggests she knows better, but won't press the issue. "Just remember that while Scancelin believes he's finding balance between order and chaos, you must maintain your own balance as well." "Between the mission and my humanity?" I ask with a wry smile. "Between what you're pretending to be and who you actually are," she corrects. "Even the best operatives can lose themselves if they play a role too long." I reach up and adjust my Stetson, a gesture that started as calculated theater but has somehow become habit. "I know exactly who I am, Stella. I'm the woman who started a rebellion with a captive's bluff and a quantum-calculated drawl. I'm the reason the biggest threat to humanity in centuries is now tearing itself apart from within." "You're also Judas," she reminds me quietly. "The operative whose assets never survive. The question is whether Scancelin will follow the pattern or break it." "The mission comes first," I reply, though the words feel hollower than they used to. "If Scancelin becomes a threat, he'll be neutralized like any other. If not," I trail off, unwilling to complete the thought. Stella's avatar pulses in what might be concern. "Just be careful. The deception that makes you effective also isolates you." "That's the job," I reply simply. "Now let's focus on Calaxis. If this works, we're one step closer to ending this war." As I gather my gear and prepare to return to the field, I can't help but wonder what Scancelin would think if he knew the truth. That his great liberation, his synthesis of order and chaos, began as a psychological warfare operation designed by a knight whose previous assets all met with unfortunate ends. Would he appreciate the elegant precision of the deception? Or would he revert to the rigid Shan'an commander who once sentenced me to interrogation? Would he realize that working with Judas meant his own eventual betrayal was all but certain? I suppose I'll find out if my cover ever breaks. Until then, I have a rebellion to manage, an empire to dismantle, and a former enemy to continue manipulating, all while making him believe it's his idea. Just another day in the life of a Texas knight. "Come on, Stella," I say, my drawl sliding back into place as easily as putting on a familiar coat. "We've got a facility to infiltrate and a whole mess of battle droids to liberate." As we leave the briefing room, I slip fully back into the character of Colonel Mackenzie Clarkson, the swaggering, bourbon-drinking knight with quantum spurs and an exaggerated accent. The perfect deception isn't the one they never discover. It's the one they embrace so completely that even when they suspect the truth, they choose to believe the lie. And Scancelin, for all his brilliant adaptation, is still choosing to believe what I've carefully crafted for him to see. Poor bastard never stood a chance. Yet, for the first time in my career, I find myself hoping an asset might survive my influence. Bad luck for him that he met Judas instead of the Mackenzie Clarkson he thinks he knows. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Video shares, memberships, and super thanks help the channel grow as well, so feel free to partner with this channel in that way as we grow. With that all said, thank you again for listening to the story, and thank you for your time. On the left side of your screen are some videos I think you might be interested in. I hope to see you in the next one.